Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I am your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very multifaceted, multi-talented entrepreneur and professional from Seattle, USA, Professor Pete Alexander. Pete, welcome to the show.
Ash, thank you so much for having me on the show, and I greatly appreciate your listeners' time as well.
Thank you. Professor Alexander is the president of Office Plants by Everything Grows. He's an author, and all of you know I'm very partial to authors. He's an author of a book titled Lighten Your Day, Fast, Easy, and Effective Stress Relief, and we will talk about the book. So, Pete, let's start with your amazing journey in sales, marketing, as a college professor and a small business owner. How did you manage your stresses?
Well, Ash, it wasn't very effectively. I grew up in an extremely dysfunctional childhood, and I didn't manage my stress well there. I just kind of hid from it for more than anything else. And in adulthood, I ignored it. And then what happened was in 2008, I had a perfect storm of stressful activities that were happening that culminated in my diagnosis with stress-induced diabetes.
Wow.
And sadly, having that happen, like many entrepreneurs, I didn't have time to deal with my health. I just had to keep going, and I didn't listen to my body about what stress was doing to it.
Interesting. And you also said that you had stress-induced diabetes. I'm diabetic. How did you manage your diabetes?
Well, when I first was diagnosed with it, it was the only one in my family that has diabetes, so didn't know really anything about it. And I was prescribed glucophage, and glucophage didn't do anything. It was literally nothing, no effect, no matter how much I took. And then they gave me an insulin pen. And so I was doing an insulin pen, and that was managing better than glucophage, but it wasn't doing it consistently enough. And so then I transitioned to a diabetes pump, which I currently wear because, as you know, as a diabetic, we're pretty much stuck with this for the rest of our lives.
Correct. And then you decided, I guess that was the time you had that epiphany and said, now I need to change my lifestyle. Tell me about that journey, and then we'll get into the other parts of our conversation.
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned earlier, I as a classic entrepreneur, I continued to burn the candle at both ends for 10 years after my initial diagnosis with stress-induced diabetes. And what happened was I ended up in the emergency room and an extended stay in intensive care unit with a severe case of diabetic ketoacidosis. And for those listeners of yours who don't know what that is, basically my body was eating itself alive because of my stress. And even that, lying in a hospital bed, it wasn't the turning point for me. The turning point for me was I had my phone, and on my second day in ICU, I get this text message, and I started stressing again about work. And I was sitting there trying to respond to that. And the nurse who was tending to me at that time, pretty much a complete stranger, she checks my blood. And when I was admitted into the ICU, my blood sugars, if you can imagine this, Ash, my blood sugars were so high that the medical grade glucometers couldn't read it. They estimated in the lab that it was 8 to 10 times higher than normal.
My goodness.
And so finally, after 2 days, it had come back down into a little bit more reasonable numbers. It was still higher, but it was reasonable. And after was sitting there trying to respond to that text,
Mm,
my numbers shot straight back up.
mm,
And this nurse says to me, "You realize that's what put you in this hospital bed in the first place."
correct.
And that was my epiphany moment.
Mm,
I actually realized at that point that this is not sustainable. And
right.
so that and it took a complete stranger as opposed to, I knew that I wasn't taking care of myself,
Mm,
but I needed to have a complete stranger tell me as
correct.
opposed to a friend or family member.
Very interesting. So, it's amazing how many different types of reasons I've heard for diabetes. Um, but stress is something that I've heard from many people. So, thank you for sharing your incredible
Mhm.
story and your journey. So, Pete, now let's talk a little bit about stress. But before I get into stress, let me come to your book because your book talks about stress. And your book
Mhm.
is Lighten Your
Mhm.
Day Fast, Easy, and Effective Stress Relief. But before you tell me about your book, is it available on
Yep.
Amazon? There you are. There's the book.
It is. It
Okay.
is.
Okay. So
Yes,
I'm
it
going to
is.
ask all my
And it
viewers and
should
listeners
be,
to check it out and to check out your book. I will
thank
go
you.
and check it out as well. But tell me about your book and then we'll talk stress.
Oh, yes. Well, so the interesting thing about the book was that when I got out of the ICU, I realized that the books that were out there available on stress,
Mm,
they were all talking about maybe one or two techniques.
mhm,
And the problem is we don't have a lot of time, especially us entrepreneurs that are so busy. We don't have a lot
mm,
of time to figure out how to deal with stress in the now.
correct.
And then guess what we do? We stress out about not being able to deal with our stress.
Yeah.
And that's a vicious circle.
Mm,
So, the intent of the book is to keep it handy for whenever or wherever you need it,
mm,
such as that important meeting or presentation that you have to give, or a difficult conversation you need to have, or the multiple priorities all needing our attention right now, or anything else that
mm,
stresses you out in the present moment. That's what the book is about. It has over 100 techniques. 90% of them you can do in 5 minutes or less.
mm,
So it's wonderful because the reality is what works for me may not work for you, Ash, and what works for you may not work for me.
correct.
So it's important to find a few tools that can work.
Mm,
And once you find those, you run with them. And
mm,
that's the intent of the book. So you go, you try one.
mm,
If it doesn't work, no big deal. You took a couple minutes to try it. Now try a different one next
mm,
time. And once you find that the one or two that work great for you, use them regularly.
mm,
That's the intent of the book.
correct. Well said. And for my viewers and listeners, would you like to share one or two ways you recommend we can handle stress?
Sure. Well, my favorite technique, hands down, is gratitude.
Hmm.
And so, for example, my wife and I, at the end of each day, what we do is we ask each other, what are we grateful for? And what we do is we recap just the basic things that happen during the day.
Mm,
So, often we have to say, oh, we have to be thankful for our house or our car or money or whatever it is. But the reality is, we can be grateful for just about anything.
correct.
And so we recap that. And what's wonderful is that it leaves us in this positive frame of mind that is a wonderful way to go to sleep.
Mm,
That's so gratitude is, it's a huge mindset shift. And if you can
mm,
get into that habit, that is by far and away my number one.
mm,
But another one that is extremely powerful is visualization.
hmm.
So, if I let me walk you through a 1 minute
Hmm.
activity,
Yeah.
and for your listeners, um, what I'd suggest is if you're driving or you're on your bike or something like
Mhm.
that, pull
Mm,
over or put a pause on listening to this because you need to have your eyes open.
correct.
But what you do is you close your eyes and
Mm,
you take a deep breath in and you go in your mind to a place you like to relax. Maybe it's the beach, maybe it's a park, maybe it's a lake, maybe it's your backyard, maybe it's the spa. Wherever it is that you like to relax, go there now and take in all of your senses. So, what do you feel? Do you feel the sun on your face? Maybe the grass or the sand under your feet? And what do you smell? Do you smell the fresh air? Maybe the lotion from the spa? And what do you hear? Do you hear the wind blowing through the trees? Maybe the water splashing on shore? And what do you see? Do you see the blue sky? Maybe the green of the trees or the grass? Whatever it is, take it all in and take another deep breath in and open your eyes. It's a
How
nice
wonderful.
grounding exercise, isn't
How
that?
wonderful. How
And
wonderful.
we can do that anywhere at our desk, at home, and it's
Mm,
just a 1 minute activity
mm,
and it just helps us calm down. And as we are going to our happy place,
mm.
we automatically start slowing our breathing down and taking deeper breaths. It is an amazing exercise.
Fabulous. Fabulous. So now let's move to stress. It's something which I think every human being experiences. Why human being? Animals experience stress. Um,
Sure.
so, Pete, my first question to you on stress is what causes stress and what are some of the symptoms to watch out for?
Yeah. So it's stress, we each manifest stress differently, but typically what causes stress is anything that poses a real or perceived challenge
Mm,
or threat to a person's well-being.
mm,
So that'll cause stress. And this can come from work, relationships, financial pressures, and other situations.
mm,
But the key is that not all stress is bad. So a lot of people think, oh, the word stress is terrible, but
mm,
the reality is that there's good stress, which is called eustress,
mm.
eustress, which is if we're working on something that we are
Yeah.
excited about,
Mm,
that's stuff that helps us get things done on time, etc. What we want to do is we want to eliminate or minimize the negative stress, which is also referred to as distress.
yeah.
And in my experience, the distress,
Mm,
it's basically comes in two flavors. One is ruminating about something in the past,
mhm,
and that's typically something like guilt, where we're guilty about something that either happened or we did or didn't do in the
mm,
past.
mm,
And we continue to fester about that and
mm,
beat ourselves up about that when the reality is we can't change the past.
mm,
So we can learn, there's positive learnings from the past, but we can't change the past. So why keep beating ourselves up about
mm,
it? So that's one. And then the other flavor is anxiety about something that may or may not happen in the future.
mm,
And Ash, I don't know if you've ever done this, but if you start thinking about something in the future that you think is going to go bad,
mm.
what typically happens?
Yeah,
It goes bad
it
because
does.
we manifest that.
Absolutely. Well said. Absolutely.
So if we can, realize that the future is in the future. And
Mm,
what I often recommend to people who are having serious anxiety about, let's say, having to give a presentation, because
mm,
that's one of the biggest fears that people have.
mm,
Well, what I recommend
mm,
is imagining 15 seconds
mm,
after you're finished with that presentation or that difficult conversation
mm,
or whatever it is. and imagining a magnificent outcome. So
mm,
let's say you were given a presentation and you get a standing ovation.
mm,
Imagine that instead of worrying about how it's going to be a negative outcome, and
mm,
that we can manifest a positive outcome as opposed to a negative outcome.
mm. Fascinating.
It is. It really is.
And you're so right. We almost will ourselves into doing things that our mind is telling us to do. So you're so right.
Yes.
My next question, you, Steve, is on the pandemic. And the
Hmm.
pandemic has
Hmm.
impacted everyone in the world. But as I've also been reading and talking to many people, the pandemic has impacted stress a lot. I would
Hmm.
love to get your perspective on how it has impacted a lot of the younger generation who are now coming into positions of authority, leadership. Because when I was growing up, there was a lot of management by walking around, and there was a lot of social connections
Hmm.
at work, et cetera, et cetera. But here are these young
Hmm.
leaders who are building their careers and have not been able to see each other for 2.5 years.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and it's a really good point. And these younger leaders, they need that experience to get better as well. The what I noticed, and this was very specific to younger leaders, but also those who had never worked remotely at all,
Mm,
was when the pandemic hit, the biggest stressor was the lack of control or the perceived lack of control. And what happens is that we as humans, when we're faced with a stressful situation,
mm,
we tend to worry about all aspects of
mm,
it. And what I highly recommended to so many people with great success was that if you can consider what it is on one side, let's say create two lists. One
mm,
list of what you can control about
mm,
the situation. The other list is what you can't control about the situation.
mm,
And you list these, you have these two lists out. And then if you can mentally focus as much attention as you can
mm,
on what you can control,
mm,
then what happens is our stress goes way, way down because when we focus on what we can control, what we can affect change in,
mm,
then we're actually making an impact. When we focus our attention on what we can't control,
mm,
it just it follows a negative cycle.
mm,
And the pandemic was a great example of this because we couldn't control the fact that the government was shutting things down
mm,
or forcing us to work from home, not letting us out. We couldn't go for walks, let's say.
mm,
So instead of worrying about what we can't control, focus on what we could control.
mm,
So let's say that we kept our distance especially when the pandemic was in full swing,
mm,
where keeping 6 feet away from someone, wearing a mask, washing our hands regularly,
mm,
those kind of things that we could control, and as well as our whole attitude towards the pandemic.
mm.
Because as we were talking about earlier, our minds, oh my gosh, it can go into this cycle. And
Correct.
when we're so stressed out
Mm,
about something, it's going to impact our
mm.
bodies.
Fantastic.
And millennials in particular, the challenge too in the pandemic situation, that uncertainty, plus the financial concerns, because we
Mm,
read about this, that, unlike, let's say, the baby boomers, the millennials, they're not on track financially to
mm,
be able to retire like the baby boomers were
mm.
able to.
Yeah,
And the change in jobs or what the situation moves, and maybe they're bouncing back and forth from job to job.
correct.
That is a big stress. And then you start wondering, okay, how long should I stay at a particular position before it looks like I'm job hopping?
Mm,
That is a challenge. And then you add to it the fact that their mental health or that of their family and friends heightens their anxiety as
Amazing.
well. So it goes all back to being able to control what you can control.
Mm,
Just worry about that. And if you can just mentally put aside what you can't control, you will be much, much more effective and your stress will go way, way down.
wonderful. What great advice. Thank you. So now
You bet.
let's talk about your other entrepreneurial venture, which is Office Plants
Mhm.
by Everything Grows. Tell me a little bit about this venture.
Oh, well, it's a fun company I bought back. It was a struggling company that I bought back in
Uh-huh.
2005. And what we do is we help companies, improve productivity and
Mm,
reduce stress through the methodical placement of lush living plants in work environments. And
mm,
the interesting thing is that not only do indoor plants enhance the overall appearance of a space,
mm,
but clinical studies, these are all over the world, different university research
mm,
studies
mm.
show that plants, live plants, not
Yeah,
the fake ones,
yeah,
not the plastic ones,
yeah,
they
yeah.
boost moods, they increase creativity. Mentioned they reduce stress, they eliminate air pollutants, which what it does is it makes for a healthier, happier environment. And
Wow.
they can make, so it's not only do they improve the overall decor, but they make employees feel good. And so it's just, it's a fun business to have. And I'm very grateful that I was able to restore the business to a productive and growing business, which, speaking about the pandemic, that was a real challenge for us too,
Mm,
because we focus only on businesses. And obviously, if people were not going into the offices, they didn't need plants in the office.
mm,
So we took a real torpedo to our revenue back in March of 2020 because
mhm.
people didn't need companies didn't need our service at that time. So but we're back on track. It's taken a couple of years to recover though, but we're back on track and very grateful for that, and we're
Fabulous.
stronger than ever.
Fabulous. And I've got time for two more questions.
Sure.
Which plants are good for us in our homes and offices?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ones, but let's say the ones that are probably going to do the best for in terms of reducing stress and in clearing the air
Mm,
would number one would be snake plants,
mhm,
which tend to be some of the easier ones for us to maintain. Spider plants, rubber plants,
mm.
peace lilies, ferns, and pothos ivy are some of the best indoor plants for boosting oxygen levels and purifying the air.
Amazing. Thank you. And my
Sure.
last question to you, Pete, is and this is for the many, many people who will listen to our conversation, based on your own incredible journey in the
Mhm.
professional world, as an entrepreneur, as a diabetic, as an entrepreneur again with Office Plants by Everything Grows. What would you say are three lessons you would want our viewers and listeners to take away from your journey and from our conversation?
Mhm. Well, that's a good question. I would say, first and foremost, not all stress is bad. We talked
Hmm.
about the fact that good stress or eustress
Yeah.
helps us get things done. But if we can eliminate the bad stress or de-stress,
Mm.
primarily ruminating about guilt in the past that we cannot change or anxiety of something in the future that hasn't
Yeah.
happened yet,
Mm.
stress will likely not affect our health. So
Mm.
that would be number one.
Mm.
Another one that I would think is a real good important thing for people to remember is that it doesn't take too long to work on your stress. It
Mm.
literally only takes 1 to 2 minutes consistently
Yeah.
on a daily basis to have that long-term positive effect. But you
Yeah.
just got to start today. That's critical. And thirdly, I'd say don't trade your health for your career, as
Yeah.
that is a very bad trade.
Yeah. Wonderful. And on that note, Pete, and your three amazing lessons, which are not all stress is bad. Um, don't do not take long to work on your. It does not take long to work on your stress, and don't take your health for granted. Nothing is more important than your own health. Thank you so much for speaking to me. Thank you for talking to me about your amazing journey and your incredible story of how you have tackled diabetes. Thank you for taking me and a lot of our viewers and listeners who will listen to it through that 1 minute exercise to manage stress. Thank you also for talking to me about your office plants and your book. Thank you again and good luck.
Thank you, Ashin, and thank you so much for your listeners' time as well.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.